Did you know that in David Morrell's novel, First Blood, Rambo actually dies? But the movie turns him into the underdog survivor who goes on to become one of the most famous action heroes in cinema history. So, for better or for worse, there are many great movies that have ignored, altered, softened, or in some cases completely rewired their book endings. Sometimes the change makes the movie stronger, sometimes it weakens the entire point of the original story, and sometimes, like with Fight Club, The Shining, or I Am Legend, the ending becomes so famous that many people forget that the book did something completely different. That's why in this video, we're going to be talking about exactly that. The top 10 films that ignored their book endings completely. It's going to be a good one, so without further ado, let's get into it.
You met me at a very strange time in my life.
Fight Club. A major reason Fight Club became what it is today is the film's ending, which feels both complete and incomplete at the same time. The story follows the nameless narrator, played by Edward Norton, who meets Tyler Durden, played by Brad Pitt. Slowly, Tyler begins to take over the narrator's entire life. After his condo is destroyed by an explosion, he moves into Tyler's broken-down house on Paper Street. They make soap together, they reject ordinary life together, and they start something that looks like therapy but quickly turns into violence together. They begin meeting in the basement of a bar and beating the crap out of each other, and soon more men join them. What starts as a small fight club grows into a group full of angry, lost men, but Tyler doesn't stop there. He turns it into Project Mayhem, a much darker organization that uses terror-style acts to attack consumer culture and financial systems. At first, the narrator seems like a passenger in Tyler's madness, but when he tries to separate himself from Tyler, he learns the truth. Tyler isn't another man, Tyler is him. Tyler is an alternate identity born from the narrator's psychological break. The narrator thought he had insomnia and blanked out on the couch, but in reality, during those gaps, Tyler had been active, in control, and very busy ruining lives. Of course, the film was based on Chuck Palahniuk's novel of the same name, but the movie's final Project Mayhem plan is much bigger and more cinematic than the book's version. In the film, Tyler's plan is to destroy buildings containing records for major credit card companies, wiping out debt and resetting the financial system. The narrator tries to stop him, but the fight becomes a one-man battle between two sides of his mind. In the end, he puts a gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. The bullet wounds him, but symbolically, it kills Tyler. His love interest Marla arrives, takes his hand, and the two watch the buildings collapse while Where Is My Mind by the Pixies plays. And honestly, it's one of the most iconic movie endings of the 1990s. But the novel does things very differently. In the book, Tyler's bombing plan fails because the explosive doesn't work properly. The narrator survives his suicide attempt and wakes up in what he first believes is heaven, only to realize he's in a mental hospital. Then, the hospital staff reveal themselves as Project Mayhem followers who still expect Tyler to return. So the book never gives us that famous image of the skyline falling while the narrator and Marla stand together. Instead, it ends with the terrifying suggestion that Tyler's movement hasn't died at all. Intriguingly, Palahniuk later followed the story up with Fight Club 2 and Fight Club 3 in comic book form, continuing the idea that Tyler's influence wasn't so easy to kill. World War Z. The World War Z film had a very different ending compared to Max Brooks' novel, World War Z, An Oral History of the Zombie War. The book is basically a massive oral history of a global zombie catastrophe. The film, however, transformed that idea into a more direct action thriller centered on Jerry Lane, played by Brad Pitt. In the book, a UN post-war commission interviewer travels around the world and collects survivor accounts after the zombie outbreak has nearly destroyed civilization. It moves from early warnings to social collapse, global panic, military failure, and then humanity's slow fight back from the brink. It feels less like a single adventure and more like a war archive, but the film changes almost everything about that. Instead of slow Romero-style zombies, the movie gives us fast, swarming infected. Instead of a collection of testimonies, it follows Jerry Lane as he tries to find the outbreak's weakness. By the end of the movie, Jerry realizes that the infected people ignore people who are already terminally ill or carrying serious pathogens because those people are poor hosts for the infection. He tests this theory by injecting himself with a curable disease in a World Health Organization facility. A zombie walks right past him, proving the idea works. This discovery leads to a kind of biological camouflage. It's not a cure and it's not a traditional vaccine, but it gives humanity a way to move through infected zones and fight back. Jerry reunites with his family in Freeport, Nova Scotia, and the movie ends on a note of cautious hope. The book doesn't end in such a clean thriller style. Humanity survives, but the world is deeply scarred and changed forever. Governments have changed, economies have shifted, entire countries have collapsed or transformed, the United States and other nations begin reclaiming territory, but the war has permanently reshaped civilization. Cuba becomes a major post-war power. Tibet gains prominence. China's political order changes after disaster and revolt. Nuclear conflict, environmental destruction, abandoned zones, and massive trauma remain part of the aftermath. The novel is slightly optimistic, but it's not simple. The zombies aren't magically cured, the old world isn't fully restored, humanity wins, but the cost is enormous. The movie gives us a solution, the book gives us history. Jurassic Park. I think we can all agree that Jurassic Park has a nearly perfect movie ending, but as is often the case with movies adapted from books, the film made its ending warmer, cleaner, and more emotionally cinematic than Michael Crichton's novel. The movie gives us the survivors escaping Isla Nublar by helicopter, while Alan Grant looks out at birds flying beside them. It's elegant, emotional, and quietly says that life found a way beyond human control. The novel, however, is much harsher. For starters, the book has more characters and more complications. It opens in Costa Rica, where a little girl is attacked by an escaped Procompsognathus. The scene didn't appear in the first film, though The Lost World later used a similar idea with a Compsognathus attack. The novel also features Ed Regis, the park's public relations head, who's basically John Hammond's loyal salesman. After the Tyrannosaur escapes, Regis panics and abandons the tour vehicles. He later dies in a way that partly resembles the movie version of Donald Gennaro's death. Several characters are different too. Ellie Sattler is a younger paleobotany graduate student. Alan Grant is less hostile towards children. Tim and Lex are swapped compared to the movie, with Tim being the older dinosaur-loving and computer-capable child in the novel, while Lex is younger. Henry Wu also has a larger role in the book, but the biggest change is John Hammond himself. In the movie, Hammond is a warm, misguided dreamer who seems to understand his mistake by the end. In the book, he's far more selfish. He continues blaming others for the park's failures, and still thinks about moving forward despite the deaths. That's why the novel kills him brutally. After the park collapses, Hammond hears what he thinks is a Tyrannosaurus roar, falls down a hill, and is eaten by a Procompsognathus. Then comes the biggest change to the ending. In the film, the survivors escape the island and the dinosaurs are left behind. In the novel, the Costa Rican authorities napalm Isla Nublar to destroy the park. The survivors are detained while officials investigate what happened. But the nightmare might not be over. In the end, Dr. Martin Gutierrez visits Grant and tells him that strange animals have been moving through the Costa Rican jungle and eating lysine-rich crops. The implication is terrifying. Some dinosaurs may have escaped into the mainland ecosystem. The movie ends with awe, the book ends with containment failure.
Savages. What breed?
No, it's not.
The Dark Tower. There are but a few happy constants on this earth, and I like to think that Stephen King adaptations are one of them, but there are definitely exceptions, and The Dark Tower is definitely one of those exceptions. The books had a brutal mythic final idea where Roland Deschain does not simply win, he reaches the Dark Tower and discovers that his quest is part of a cycle. He's sent back to the beginning, forced to repeat the journey again, but this time with one important difference. He has the Horn of Eld, suggesting the next cycle may finally change. The 2017 film goes for a much tidier Hollywood finish. Roland and Jake Chambers defeat Walter, also known as the Man in Black. The tower is saved, Jake chooses to remain with Roland in Midworld and train as a gunslinger. That's a much simpler ending. The problem is that the Dark Tower isn't a tiny side project in Stephen King's universe, it's his massive Western fantasy horror saga, one that connects to many of his other works. Trying to squeeze that kind of story into a single 95-minute film was always going to be an issue, and the film also leaves leaves out crucial characters like Eddie, Dean, Susanna Dean, and Oi, who are essential to the emotional core of the novels. The villain side sees some changes too. In the movie, Walter is the main and final enemy, but in the books, he's important, but the larger force behind the tower's corruption is the Crimson King, who barely matters in the film. There is one interesting lore detail, though. Roland has the Book of Eld in the movie, which means the film can technically be read as a loose sequel or alternate cycle after the books, rather than a straight adaptation of The Gunslinger. And honestly, that idea sounds really clever on paper, but in reality, most audiences experienced it as a rushed remix that skipped the emotional weight of the novels. Idris Elba could have made an awesome Roland, and Matthew McConaughey could have been an amazing Man in Black, but the film never gives them the space the story needed. The books end with mythic repetition, the movie ends with a basic victory, and that difference is everything.
What is it? It's everything.
My Sister's Keeper. My Sister's Keeper has one of those book endings that hurts because the tragedy isn't the obvious kind. The story centers around Kate, a teenager with leukemia, and her younger sister Anna, who is conceived to be a donor match for Kate. From birth, Anna's body is expected to support her sister's illness. She's not treated like a normal child with full bodily autonomy, she's treated almost like medicine. That's a serious idea. After years of painful procedures, Anna decides she no longer wants to be used for Kate's medical treatments. She sues her parents for medical emancipation, forcing the whole family to confront a brutal question: how much should one child be expected to sacrifice for another? Then comes the big reveal. Anna has taken the legal route because Kate asked her to. Kate is tired of being sick and wants Anna to have a life of her own. The judge grants Anna medical emancipation, and for a moment, it seems the story has made its point about choice and agency. Then, the novel delivers its cruelest blow. Anna dies in a freak car accident. Her kidney is donated to Kate anyways, and years later, Kate survives in good health, but without the sister who saved her. I mean, that's brutal, but it's also the entire meaning of the book. Life doesn't always follow moral math. Nobody gets to control tragedy just because they've suffered enough. The 2009 movie, directed by Nick Cassavetes and starring Cameron Diaz and Abigail Breslin, changed that ending completely. Instead of Anna dying, it's Kate who dies. That made the ending more predictable because Kate had been the sick sister from the get-go, and some changes here are understandable, like adjusting ages or changing Judge DeSalvo's gender, but the ending was the spine of the story. Jodi Picoult objected to the change, and it's easy to understand why. Changing the ending didn't just change who died, it changed what the story meant. The book says life is unfair in ways nobody can plan for. The movie says the sick character dies. It's a much safer ending, but also much, much weaker. Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump is one of those rare movies that feels warm, sad, strange, and comforting all at once, but Winston Groom's novel has a very different flavor. The movie follows Forrest Gump, played by Tom Hanks, as he moves through American history almost by accident. He becomes a football star, a war hero, a ping pong champ, a shrimp businessman, and a pop culture icon. Through all of it, the person he loves most is Jenny, his childhood sweetheart. The movie plays out like a bittersweet American fable. The novel is rougher, stranger, and much more absurd. In the book, Forrest isn't exactly the same gentle figure we get in the movie. His adventures are wilder, his behavior is rougher, and yeah, the book really does send him into space with an orangutan named Sue. The movie's ending is sad, but it gives Forrest emotional closure. He marries Jenny, learns they have a son, and then loses Jenny after she becomes ill. It hurts, but Forrest is left with a child to raise and a sense that he finally experienced love and family. Sadly, the novel denies him that same closure. Forrest does learn that Jenny has a son and that the boy is his, but Jenny doesn't die in the original novel. She's built a life with another man, and Forrest decides not to interfere because he believes the child's current father figure may be better for him. Forrest gives up his fortune and lives a simple life as a street performer with Sue the orangutan. But that's not the ending most movie fans remember. The sequel novel, Gump & Co., later changes things again by revealing that Jenny died of hepatitis C and bringing Forrest back towards his son's life, but the original book ending is much colder and less comforting than the film. The movie gives Forrest heartbreak and hope, but the book gives him distance, absurdity, and a life that keeps wandering.
Let me save you! Let me save you!
I Am Legend. I Am Legend had not one, but two movie endings, and shockingly enough, the one that was left out was the one closer in spirit to Richard Matheson's novel. The 2007 film stars Will Smith as Robert Neville, a virologist who appears to be the last uninfected man in a ruined New York City. Most of humanity has died, while many survivors have become nocturnal infected creatures called Darkseekers. In the theatrical ending, Neville and two other survivors, Anna and Ethan, are trapped in his basement lab after the Darkseekers break into the house. Neville gives Anna a sample of the cure, then sacrifices himself with a grenade to destroy the attacking creatures, allowing Anna and Ethan to escape. Anna later reaches a survivor colony carrying the cure. Neville becomes a legend for humanity, but the alternate ending is much closer to the point of Matheson's book. In that version, the Darkseeker leader presses a butterfly shape into the glass. Neville realizes the leader hasn't come out of mindless rage, he's come to rescue the female Darkseeker Neville has been experimenting on. That changes everything. Neville looks at the wall of photos showing his past test subjects and realizes how he must look from their point of view. He's not the hero, he's the monster who abducts, experiments on, and kills them. That idea connects directly to the novel. In Matheson's book, Neville learns that a new society of infected vampires is formed. They're not just mindless monsters, they've developed structure, identity, and fear of him. To them, Neville is the legendary killer who comes during the day and murders their people while they sleep. At the end of the novel, Neville is captured and awaits execution. A woman named Ruth gives him suicide pills so he can die quickly, and as he looks at the infected society staring at him, he realizes the truth. He's no longer the last hero of humanity, he's their boogeyman, and that's what the title means. I Am Legend doesn't mean a legend in the heroic sense, it means urban legend. Monster, nightmare. The theatrical ending makes Neville a savior, but the book makes him the monster of someone else's story. The Shining. Stanley Kubrick's The Shining changed a lot from Stephen King's novel, including the ending. The film follows Jack Torrance as he takes the winter caretaker job at the Overlook Hotel and slowly collapses under the influence of isolation, addiction, rage, and the hospital's supernatural evil. By the end of the film, Jack kills Dick Halloran inside the hotel and chases Danny into the hedge maze. Danny escapes by retracing his steps in the snow, while Jack gets lost and freezes to death outside. Wendy and Danny escape in Halloran's snowcat. Then, the final shot reveals Jack in an old 1921 photograph at the Overlook, suggesting that his connection to the hotel is older and stranger than we fully understand. It's a creepy, ambiguous ending, but King's novel ends very differently. In the book, the boiler room is extremely important. Jack is told to relieve the boiler's pressure because it's unstable. As the hotel's evil takes over and Jack loses himself, he forgets to do that. Then, during the climax, the boiler explodes, destroying the hotel. Danny, Wendy, and Dick Halloran survive. Yup, Halloran lives in the novel. Jack dies, but so does the hotel, which dies with him. Thematically, that's a huge difference. The book gives the Overlook a physical destruction and allows the survivors to move forward. The movie keeps the Overlook intact, kills Halloran, and leaves the hotel's evil feeling eternal. Kubrick's version is colder, more mysterious, and less emotionally redemptive. King's version is more direct about Jack's tragedy, the hotel's destruction, and Danny's survival. Both endings are powerful, but they're absolutely not the same story. The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame was always a strange beast because it was adapted from a novel that was absolutely not written for children. Victor Hugo's Notre Dame de Paris was first published in 1831 and was partly a plea to preserve Gothic architecture, especially Notre Dame itself, at a time when medieval structures were being neglected or destroyed. So yeah, the book wasn't simply about Quasimodo and Esmeralda, it was also Hugo saying, please stop destroying history, but in novel form. Naturally, Disney softened the story a bunch, but the movie did keep two major emotional ideas. Firstly, Quasimodo's love for Esmeralda remains unreturned, and he accepts that instead of becoming bitter. Second, the film keeps the ugly dynamic between Esmeralda and Frollo. Disney makes Frollo a judge rather than an archdeacon, but he still has that self-righteous obsession. His song, Hellfire, carries the same disturbing idea from the novel. If Esmeralda won't belong to him, he would rather see her die. That said, the film still cuts plenty. Pierre Gringoire reservoir is mostly gone. Frollo's younger brother, Jahan, is also removed, which changes Frollo's backstory and his relationship to Quasimodo. Phoebus is also completely rewritten. In the novel, he's a vain womanizer who lets Esmeralda suffer. In the Disney movie, he becomes a heroic romantic lead. But the biggest change is the ending. Hugo's novel is devastating. Esmeralda is executed. Frollo watches and laughs, and Quasimodo throws him from the cathedral. Later, Quasimodo disappears and eventually dies beside Esmeralda's body. Years later, their skeletons are found together. And I mean, obviously Disney didn't do that. The movie kills Frollo, lets Esmeralda and Phoebus live, and gives Quasimodo public acceptance. Instead of ending with bones in a tomb, it ends with Quasimodo being welcomed by the people of Paris. For a Disney movie, that makes sense. For a Hugo adaptation, it's a complete emotional rewrite. The book ends in tragedy, but the movie ends with acceptance. The Mist. Most of The Mist follows David Drayton and other survivors trapped inside a supermarket while monstrous creatures move through the mist outside. Eventually, David leaves the store with a small group, including his young son Billy, because staying there is no longer safe. They drive through the mist, but the car eventually runs out of gas. This is when things become unbearable. David and the others believe the monsters will find them sooner or later, so they choose what they think is mercy. David uses the bullets he has left and shoots everyone in the car, including his own son. The awful part is that there are 5 people, but only 4 bullets, so David can't kill himself. Instead, he steps outside the car and waits for the mist to take him. However, no monster comes. Instead, the army arrives. Soldiers are clearing the mist and rescuing survivors. David sees truckloads of people from the supermarket, including the woman who earlier left alone to find her children. If David and his group had waited just a bit longer, they might have survived. With his wife already dead and his son killed by his own hand, David collapses in pure horror. The novella, however, ends very differently. In Stephen King's original story, David, Billy, Amanda, and the others escape the supermarket and keep driving. David's wife is heavily implied to be dead, but the story doesn't give the same final gut punch as the film. The group reaches a Howard Johnson's near the state line, and David writes down the account of what happened. The ending remains ambiguous. After hearing a faint radio signal, David thinks he may have heard the word Hartford. He holds on to that word as a possible sign of hope. The novella ends with him whispering Hartford and hope. Frank Darabont changed that completely because he wanted the film to have a final devastating blow, and Stephen King himself approved of this change. Honestly, it's one of those rare instances where a movie ending may be more famous than the book ending because it's so cruel, so final, and so unforgettable. The novella ends with hope amidst uncertainty. The movie ends with emotional annihilation. Well guys, that's all for this one. These movies prove that adaptation endings can change everything. Sometimes the film improves the story, sometimes it weakens the original meaning, and sometimes both versions become iconic in completely different ways. Fight Club gave us falling buildings instead of a failed bomb and a mental hospital. World War Z turned an oral history into an action thriller cure hunt. Jurassic Park softened Crichton's brutal ending. The Dark Tower turned King's mythic cycle into a rushed victory. My Sister's Keeper changed the iconic death that defined the book. Forrest Gump gave Forrest emotional closure the novel denied him. I Am Legend missed the full meaning of its own title. The Shining kept the Overlook alive instead of blowing it up. The Hunchback of Notre Dame transformed tragedy into Disney acceptance, and The Mist did the opposite by making King's ending even darker. So yeah, book endings matter, but sometimes movie endings become legends on their own. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons because that's the best way to see more stuff like this. Those 2 small clicks from you help us tremendously in bringing you more of these awesome videos. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and we'll see ya in the next one.